I want to go across live at this time to Ravi Agrawal, Editor-in-Chief of Foreign Policy, one of the top magazines, journals looking at global affairs at this moment. Ravi, welcome to the news track. It's great to have you back as always. You know, outside of all the hype, outside of the chants of Modi, how significant is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to New York and Washington, D.C.? In what ways, according to you, Ravi, does this signal a new phase in bilateral ties between India and the United States?
It's significant for sure. I mean, since the pandemic, the United States hasn't received that many world leaders, certainly not for state visits. I believe this is Biden's third state visit receiving people since he became president. So in that sense, in as much as it signals Washington's priorities to the world, first it was France, then South Korea, and now India, I think that's important. That's an important signal for India and also for the world. In terms of what this means for the relationship, I think it boosts an already very strong relationship. I don't think this visit on its own is transformational or that different. I think instead it sort of fits within the trajectory that these two countries have been headed towards over the last nearly 2 decades of building stronger ties, of allying more closely in shared interests and issues across the Indo-Pacific.
One of the areas of focus in the build-up to this visit has been the transfer of defense technology. The fact that Washington, D.C. seems to be okay with transferring GE-414 jet engine technology, which would be used by India in the light combat aircraft, the Mk2, which Hindustan Aeronautics is coming out with. How significant do you think this agreement on transfer of technology really is? Because the U.S. has been facing a lot of political backlash, even on the issue of transferring nuclear submarine technology to a country which is an ally like Australia.
Yes, so I think this particular aspect that you've just mentioned, the transfer of defense technology, manufacturing in India, the GE-414 jet engine deal that should be signed this week, that strikes me as a significant advance in the relationship. This is something that the two sides have been working on for quite a while. And I think it's important because it signals to India and the world that this relationship is important, it's special, but also when it comes to military ties, what's important here is that, India is the largest arms importer in the world. Its own domestic capacity has not been that strong, which is why it's had to rely primarily on Russia over the last several decades for its arms and armaments. I believe more than 50% of its arms come from Russia. If America truly intends to strengthen the U.S.-India relationship, I think one of the areas it's realized where it has to do more is to provide India with better arms, to provide India with the means to manufacture better arms on its own terms and on its own turf, which would allow Delhi to wean itself off of Moscow in the medium to long term. And I think that is, from a strategic perspective, certainly one of the things that this White House has been thinking about quite strongly.
We've been hearing some murmurs amongst U.S. congressmen on the issue of India's continuing ties with Russia. Now, in that interview the Prime Minister just gave to the Wall Street Journal, he's basically making the point that India isn't on any side, we're on the side of peace. Is that something that is understood beyond the Biden administration by the larger U.S. political community, or do you think when the Prime Minister is here, there could be some pushback on the issue of buying oil from Russia, or on the issue of India continuing to be dependent on Russia for weapon systems, which really is a legacy of the past, which could GE-414 deal and various other deals like the Predator deal possibly could be changing, but that's a process that will take time.
Rahul, when everyone says that the India-US relationship is based on shared values, I think they're wrong. It's actually based on realism. It's based on shared interests, not values. And, right now, for several reasons, the US-India relationship, it's in the interest of both sides to cooperate, to ally more, to build stronger tech ties, stronger defense ties. And part of this has to do with China as the big overarching issue that concerns America. Certainly, it's the #1 issue that America cares about, but also increasingly for India. And that has brought these two sides closer together. Now, would America want India to not purchase Russian oil? Yes, absolutely. Has India irritated the West by dramatically increasing the amount of Russian crude it purchases? Yes, absolutely. Does Washington realize that it really can't do that much to stop India from purchasing this oil? Yes, unfortunately. And I think the issue there is realism. I think India has made the case very clearly that it needs cheap oil. If it doesn't get cheap oil, India will be presented with runaway inflation. India imports almost all of its fuel, so it needs globally cheap oil. America can't really argue against that imperative that New Delhi has. So I think both sides realize their needs, they realize what they want, but they realize also the constraints that the other side has. In that sense, this relationship is a fairly mature one, even when there are very clear differences, such as Russia. Prime Minister Modi has said what he said about Russia. I think many in the West wish he would say much more. It's one thing to call for peace. It is another thing to do nothing in the face of what is clearly not only just an invasion and an active war, but a violation of sovereignty, a violation of sovereign borders. And I think this is the one area where India might need to watch out a little bit, because sovereignty matters for India as well when it comes to China. So maintaining strong lines, literally, is very important.
Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, just came back from a visit to Beijing, where he met President Xi Jinping, met the foreign minister. What are you taking away from that visit? There are multiple interpretations. One is reading, one is that, it doesn't really change the downward trend, which now seem irreversible. The other is maybe this will be a pause, a bit of an effort to try and reset the deteriorating relationship between Beijing and DC.
Of all things, Rahul, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. This is certainly not a reset. I don't think U.S. China ties are going to get much better anytime soon. It's very clear that on both sides domestically, there are forces that really feel like this is a relationship that is based purely on competition. And there may be areas of cooperation, but competition first. Given that, I think the way to see this most recent trip where Blinken met his counterpart Qin Gang, he met the Communist Party foreign policy chief Wang Yi, and then also finally Xi Jinping. I think the way to see it is that by increasing people-to-people ties, the likelihood of crises spiraling out of control is reduced just a little bit. I mean, to give you a little bit of context, this is Blinken's first visit to China since he became Secretary of State 2.5 years ago. The last such visit by a U.S. Secretary of State was 2018. By comparison, Hillary Clinton, in her 4 years as Secretary of State 15 years ago, went to China 7 times. Blinken is not going to go to China 7 times. So talk of a reset, I think, is far-fetched. We're in an era of increased, expanded, enhanced competition between the world's two biggest economies. That is the new great game, and we're all just playing in that game. I think, again, if these two sides can figure out ways to have off-ramps when there are crises, and just in the last 3 weeks, there were crises. There was a flyby incident at the end of May, and then in early June, there was an incident of a Chinese destroyer cutting across a U.S. destroyer in the Taiwan Straits in a fairly dangerous way. In moments like that, you need very clear lines of communication. You need both sides to be in a place where they've spoken to each other ahead of time that if you cross these lines, X, Y, or Z could happen, in the hopes of deterring real problems. So I see this visit as being one step forward in the relationship in terms of managing communications.
We leave it there for the time being. Ravi Agrawal, always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much.